Welcome to the Dawson Files, a collection of haunting cases where justice and truth rarely walk the same path. Each story stands alone, yet every investigation reveals another piece of Detective Jack Dawson's world. In these pages, you'll find love, betrayal, guilt, and redemption, the thin line between right and wrong, light and shadow. Enter the case file, and remember, every truth has its price. This case reached Detective Dawson through an old friend, Captain Masson of the French Gendarmerie. Years ago, they had worked together on a joint investigation. When Masson retired, he sent Dawson one last file, the story of Camille Leroy. A cold wind swept along National Road 7, cutting the valley in two. The street lights cast flickering halos over the wet asphalt, and the silence of the night was broken only by the distant rumble of trucks. Inside the small St. Riviere police station, the neon lights buzzed with a dull hum. At that late hour, Adjutant Masson was drinking lukewarm coffee, absent-mindedly rereading the day's reports. That's when a car door slammed outside. A man burst in, short of breath. His coat was covered in dust, his damp hair stuck to his forehead. He glanced nervously behind him, as if afraid of being followed. "Good evening," he stammered. I've been attacked." Masson slowly raised his eyes, studying the visitor. "Sit down. Where did this happen?" "At a rest area, a few kilometers from here," the man replied, wiping his sweaty hands on his trousers. "What time?" "Around midnight, I think." The tone was hesitant, the voice trembling. Masson jotted down a few lines while discreetly observing him. The man's name was Jean Morel, living about 30 kilometers away. Nothing abnormal at first glance, except for his darting gaze, his nervous fingers tapping on the desk, and above all, the direction he had come from. The policeman frowned. "You said the Valley Rest area, the one to the south?" Yes, that's right." Strange, Masson thought. He had seen him arrive from the north just minutes earlier. To come from the south, he would have had to pass through the village the other way. "Did you call emergency services?" "No, I got scared. I thought it was better to come here." His voice trembled, but nothing in his face showed the fear of a victim, more like the unease of a man afraid of saying too much. Masson kept taking notes, remaining impassive. "Do you remember your attackers?" "No, it was dark. 3 silhouettes, maybe 2, I'm not sure." The policeman scribbled a few more words, then closed his notebook slowly. The air in the office seemed to freeze. Behind the silence, the steady tick-tock of the wall clock could be heard. "Very well, Mr. Morel. We'll record your statement. You can go home. We'll be in touch." Jean nodded silently, stood up, and left the station in haste. Through the window, Masson watched him reach his car and drive off. Not south, but once again north, the same direction he'd come from. He remained motionless for a moment, hands clasped behind his back. Something about that complaint didn't add up. A false calm, a lie slipped between 2 breaths, and that persistent feeling, heavy as the fog outside. This man was hiding something. 2 months had passed since Jean Morel's troubling visit to the Saint Riviere police station. Winter was slowly settling over the valley. Morning smelled of damp earth, the road still glistening with dew, and the wind sharp with frost whistled through the bare hedges. That Monday at dawn, Michel Dufresne, a truck driver for 20 years, was heading toward the Montfaucon depot. The radio barely crackled in his truck's cabin. He had taken that country road dozens of times, never paying it much attention. But that morning, something made him slow down. Something lay in the ditch, just after the Moulin bend. A long shape, motionless, covered by a light-colored coat. Michel braked suddenly. The engine coughed, then died. He stepped out, breathing hard, his heartbeat pounding in his temples. The wind blew dead leaves across the road, and in the frozen silence, he heard only the sound of his own footsteps. "My God," he whispered. It was a woman, young. Her face was bruised, her hair stuck to her skin by the dew. Her hands were clenched tight, as if she had tried to defend herself. Michel staggered back, overcome with nausea, then pulled out his phone to call the gendarmerie. His voice shook. This is Michel Dufresne. I found someone. A woman. On the Montfaucon Road. I think she's dead. 20 minutes later, the Saint-Rivière gendarmes arrived on the scene. Chief Brigadier Lemoine gave calm instructions. Seal off the area. No bystanders. We wait for the coroner. The body was covered with a white sheet while investigators searched the area. No signs of a struggle nearby, no fresh footprints, only the marks of a heavy vehicle's tires. The victim wore a cheap wool coat, worn shoes. No handbag, no papers, no phone. The coroner arrived soon after, bent over the body for a long time, and in a low voice said what everyone dreaded, dead for several hours. No deep wounds, but clear marks around the neck. Strangulation. Silence fell. Even the wind seemed to stop. The coroner added, almost to himself, and she was pregnant. About 3 months. The word struck like a blade. A young woman, strangled, pregnant, abandoned in a ditch 2 kilometers from town. In Saint-Rivière, where everyone knows everyone, the discovery spread like an icy wave. That evening, shutters stayed closed. Conversations fell silent when a patrol passed by. And in the cafes the next morning, people whispered, an outsider. Surely. Or maybe not. Maybe one of ours. No one knew it yet. But this woman's death would reopen far more than an investigation. It would awaken the buried secrets of the entire valley. 3 days after the discovery of the body, the fingerprint report finally landed on Captain Masson's desk. The prints matched those of a young woman reported missing several months earlier, registered in a social file from the south. Name, Camille Leroy, 26 years old, originally from a small village in the Gard department. Masson read the file several times before looking up. Camille Leroy, he murmured. At last, we have a name, but not yet the truth. The next morning, 2 gendarmes set out toward the victim's birthplace. The GPS led them through vineyards and olive groves before they reached a small grey house, surrounded by a cracked wall. A dog barked endlessly in front of the door. The adjutant knocked. The door opened abruptly on a stocky man in his 50s, bushy eyebrows, hard eyes. What do you want? National Gendarmerie. Are you Mr. André Leroy? Yes. What do you want from me? It's about your daughter, Camille Leroy. At that name, a brief silence. The man's face closed up. My daughter? He replied harshly. She left years ago. I don't know anything. What do you expect me to say? His tone was sharp, almost aggressive. Masson observed the deep wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the calloused hands resting on the door frame, ready to slam it shut. We need to know more about her, Mr. Leroy. When did she leave home? 4 years, maybe 5. She did what she wanted. She never listened, so one day she left. Suited me just fine. The other gendarme tried to soften the exchange. You never heard from her again? No calls, no letters. No, and that was for the best, he snapped, half closing the door. At the end of the hallway, a hesitant figure appeared, a thin woman with grey hair tied in a bun. André, let them speak. He sighed, stepped aside, and walked off toward the living room, muttering. Lucienne, the mother, approached timidly. Her hands trembled. Forgive him. He doesn't like to talk about the past. Camille, she was kind, too kind, but she wanted to live differently. He said she was rebellious. Do you know where she went? Masson asked gently. Yes, she went to live with her sister, Sophie, in Clerval. Have you seen her since? Lucienne shook her head, tears rising to her eyes. Not since she left home. We know he can't help us. We can't help us. We can't help us, we have no choice. Masson nodded slowly, thanked the woman calmly, then left the house under the icy gaze of the father, who stood at the window, cigarette in hand. At the sister's home, Sophie Martel's house, the victim's sister, contrasted with the previous one: a bright facade, a neat garden, a new car in the driveway. Sophie opened the door cautiously, a dish towel in her hand. Yes? Gendarmerie of Saint-Rivière. We're investigating your sister, Camille Leroy. A flash crossed her eyes. Camille? What has she done? Nothing. But we need information about her last years. She let them in. The smell of coffee, mixed with that of clean laundry. Sitting on the couch, she crossed her arms, nervous. Camille lived here for 2 years. She helped around, looked for work. But my husband never tolerated her presence, said she was too intrusive. Why? Masson asked. I don't know. Maybe jealousy, or just pride. He doesn't like anyone meddling in his affairs. And after that, she had to leave. She didn't want trouble. She found a job on a farm, near Les Aubépines, I think. Did she contact you afterwards? Yes, a few times, at first. But her calls grew rare, and then, one day, nothing more. Sophie stayed silent for a moment, then spoke more softly. She said she was happy, that she'd met someone. A good man, she said. But, I don't know. Her voice had changed, more anxious, sometimes. Captain Masson wrote down every word. Before leaving, he asked, Do you have a recent photo of her? Sophie fetched a framed picture from a shelf. A young woman smiled there, hair tied up, eyes clear. Masson felt a pang in his chest, that same gentleness found on faces of those who still hope. As he closed the car door, he murmured to himself, Camille Leroy, 26, walked away without looking back. And for 4 years, no one really wondered where she'd gone. The engine roared, lifting the road dust. On the horizon, the hills of Les Aubépines stretched under the winter sun, silent. But Masson knew that beneath their calm surface, something waited to be uncovered. The farm stretched as far as the eye could see. The workers spoke in low, wary voices. Camille, they said, had been polite, discreet, helpful. But one rumor kept surfacing. She was said to have had an affair with the owner, Antoine Delmar. Antoine, 30 years old, open shirt, cooled stare. Nonsense, he snapped. She worked for my mother, nothing more. And you? Did you drink often? Asked the investigator calmly. So what? Drinking isn't a crime. The farm drivers were less forgiving. They all described Antoine as a violent man, drunk almost every night, and they all knew there was something between him and the young servant. The interrogation room at the French Gendarmerie was narrow, lit by a flickering fluorescent light buzzing overhead. A thick file rested on the table, marked with a red label. Case Leroy, Camille. Homicide. Captain Masson slowly turned a page while, across from him, Antoine Delmas tried to conceal his unease. His crumpled shirt still bore traces of dirt and cold alcohol. He stared at the wall, nervously chewing the inside of his cheek. Mr. Delmas, Masson began in an even tone, we know that you drove Camille Leroy home some evenings. Why? Antoine shrugged. She helped my mother. I was just giving her a ride, that's all. Always on the same days, almost, when she finished late. And the other workers? Did you drive them too? No, only her. The others went back together with the driver. A pause. Masson's pen tapped the file 3 times. Why her, and not the others? Antoine frowned. Because my mother liked her. She trusted her. Masson raised his head and met his gaze. Your mother, yes. But not you. Is that right? Antoine flinched. He clenched his fists, his back tightening against the chair. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that many witnesses say you were unusually close to Camille. You drove her home alone, sometimes late. You bought her meals, clothes. Even your workers noticed. Those gossipy women talk too much, he suddenly shouted. They make everything up. Masson didn't react. He let the silence settle, that heavy silence that eats away at the nerves. You drank often, didn't you? So what? That's not a crime. No. But it's a habit that draws attention, especially when a young woman disappears. Antoine turned pale. He looked away, then burst out in a panic. This is absurd. If you're looking for someone, look at Julien Roche, the workers' driver. He was always hanging around her. Everyone could see it. Masson exchanged a brief glance with his colleague. That accusation had just opened a new lead. Julien entered the same room, tense, hands covered in grease. He sat without a word, eyes fixed on the floor. Masson began calmly. Julien Roche, 34 years old, driver at the Aubépines farm. You transported the female workers every day, correct? Yes, sir. And Camille Leroy was part of the group. Yes. We've been told you always dropped her off last. Why? Julien swallowed hard, his fingers drumming nervously on the table. It wasn't intentional. She lived a little farther than the others. Really? Said Masson, leafing through a map. Yet 2 of them live on the same road as she did. Sweat beaded along Julien's neck. Fine, sometimes I did drop her off last. But not for what you think. Then for what? He hesitated. I liked her. That's all. I thought she was kind, different. But I never disrespected her. Did you tell her about your feelings? No. Well, once. But she turned me down, said she wasn't interested. And how did you react? Julien looked up, wounded. I understood. I didn't insist. She didn't deserve to be bothered. Masson studied him closely, watching for the smallest crack, the slightest lie. But Julien remained upright, sincere, almost dignified. The interrogation went on for another hour. At the end, the captain quietly closed his notes and said, You can go, Mr. Roche, but stay available. We'll probably have more questions. When the door closed, Masson murmured to his deputy, Delmas is lying. Roche may have loved her, but he didn't kill her. And I'd bet the first one is hiding much more than a simple car ride. The Delmas house stood at the end of a gravel path, half hidden behind a hedge of yews. It breathed neglect, half-opened shutters, peeling paint, a gate creaking in the cold wind. When the gendarmes rang, it was a frail woman who opened the door. Madame Delmas, Antoine's mother. Her face, marked by illness, still held a disarming gentleness. Come in, gentlemen. Don't stay outside. The wind is freezing. She led them into the living room, where the air smelled faintly of soup and lavender. On the table lay an unfinished piece of knitting and a framed photo of a man in uniform, her late husband. Masson spoke carefully. We're investigating Camille Leroy, madam. She worked here, didn't she? A faint smile lit up the wrinkled face. Camille. Ah, yes, my little Camille. She was an angel. Polite, hard-working, always had a kind word. She came every morning, left in the evening. She took care of everything without being asked. Even when my legs hurt, she still managed to make me laugh. Her voice broke. She clutched her handkerchief in her frail fingers. You know, I never had a daughter, so I treated her a bit like mine. She called me Madame, but I could feel she cared for me. Masson nodded slowly. And your son, Antoine? The old woman hesitated, her gaze drifting toward the window. Antoine isn't bad, just unhappy. Since his father's death, he's been lost. He drinks too much. But Camille didn't judge him. She talked to him like a friend. Maybe too much sometimes. A silence fell. The investigators exchanged a meaningful glance. Do you know where she went afterward? Masson asked. Madame Delmas nodded slowly. Yes, the Berthiers, friends of ours, used to visit me often. Their house is in Montfaucon, closer to the main road. They'd noticed how well Camille took care of me. Always tidy, discreet, efficient. Madame Berthier once told me, if only I had a girl like her at home. So I told them about Camille, and they offered her work with them. Camille was delighted. She said it would help her save money, earn a real wage. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. But she never broke contact. Sometimes she came back here on Sundays to bring me flowers or fix the fence. She'd say, Madame Delmar, you're like my mother from the north. Masson took notes. And when did you see her for the last time? Oh, several weeks ago. Maybe a month. She was supposed to come by, but she didn't. I thought she was busy with the Berthier. You know, she worked a lot. The captain closed his notebook softly, then asked in a low voice, "Do you think she's still with them?" Madame Delmar gave a small, sad laugh. "I believe so. Or maybe she found something better. Camille had a bright future ahead." The investigators didn't answer. They knew, unlike her, that Camille would never come back. When they left the house, the old woman stayed standing in the doorway, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She watched them walk away, not understanding why the gendarmes had suddenly lowered their heads as they saluted her. The Berthier residence overlooked the fields. The father, a notary, and his reserved wife welcomed the investigators. Camille. Yes, she worked here until the day before the tragedy. She was supposed to return to Madame Delmar's house, but she didn't take anything with her. The kitchen calendar still showed the fatal date, the day of the murder. The gendarmes now knew they were standing on the last trace of the young woman's life. The days passed, and with them, the rumors grew. In the narrow streets of Montfaucon, people spoke of nothing else. The young maid found dead at the edge of the village. The gossipers gathered in front of the bakery, voices low, eyes glancing toward the road. "They say she wasn't as innocent as she looked. And that boy, the one always hanging around?" The name returned again and again, whispered like a shadow. Pierre Lafon, a young drifter, unemployed, often seen near the farm or in the village, hands in his pockets, cap pulled low over his eyes. Some said he had been following her for weeks. Others swore they had seen him waiting near the Berthier gate at dusk. When the gendarmes decided to question him, it was already too late. Pierre Lafon had vanished. No one knew where he lived, nor when he had left. An uneasy silence fell over those who, only days earlier, claimed to know everything about him. For the first time, Masson felt that distinct sensation, that of a disappearance too clean, too deliberate to be chance. One evening, a night watchman from the commune came to the station of his own accord. An older man, clear-eyed, with hands still stained with diesel. "I don't know if this will help you, but I saw her, the young lady, several times." "When?" asked Masson. "Late. Around 9. Sometimes later. She went out alone, always the same way. She took the little path that runs along the barn and leads to the orchards. No one ever saw her leave. She came back later, quietly, head down." He hesitated, then added, "That night too. The last one. I'm sure of it. She was wearing a beige coat, a scarf. She walked fast, like someone was waiting for her." Masson remained silent for a long time. The watchman's words echoed like voices from the past. He now knew Camille hadn't simply wandered off into the night. She had gone to meet her fate. Behind the Berthier house, the small room she occupied opened onto a garden without a fence, a simple glass door that opened into the darkness. No sound, no trace. All it would take was to open it slightly, step outside and disappear, without anyone noticing. Rain had battered Seine-Rivière for 3 days. The windows of the station rattled under the gusts. In Captain Masson's office, a flickering lamp cast a yellow circle of light over a thick file. Phone record analysis, Camille Leroy. He stared at the printed sheet for a long time. Lines of numbers, precise times, short call durations, and 2 anomalies. 2 unknown numbers, recurring, spaced out over time. One had never called anyone else a digital ghost. The other, however, was active, linked to a mobile registered at an address 50 kilometers from the village. Masson lifted his eyes toward his deputy. "Get a warrant. We're paying him a visit." The next morning, at dawn, the Gendarmerie burst into an old, isolated house by the departmental road. A man opened the door, disoriented, eyes bloodshot, hands blackened with grease. Police. We have a few questions about a mobile phone. The man hesitated, then slowly stepped back. A few minutes later, he was seated in the interrogation room. His fingers trembled. He stared at the floor. Masson placed a laminated sheet in front of him, a call log, circled in red. This number, it's yours, isn't it? Yes, but I don't understand. It's just an old phone. An old phone that was used to call a woman several times before she was found strangled. The man turned pale. His breathing quickened. Masson said nothing, letting him drown in his own panic. Finally, in a hoarse voice, he confessed, "Yes, it was me. There were 3 of us. We attacked a guy on the road 2 months ago." Masson froze. "What guy? Where?" "On the National Road, near a rest area. We wanted to rob him. He was with a girl, but I swear, we never touched the girl." The captain leaned forward slowly. "Repeat that." "We hit the guy, took his money and his phone." The gendarmes exchanged stunned looks. This attack matched the incident Jean Morel had reported 2 months earlier. The suspect told everything. The guy was parked with a woman. "We beat him up, took his cash, his phone. While checking it, I found a woman's number, Camille. So I started calling her, for fun." The connection was made. Jean Morel, Camille Leroy, and the attacker. The stolen phone had become the bridge between the victim and her future murderer. By cross-checking the data, the Gendarmerie finally uncovered that Jean Morel was a friend of Antoine Damas and one of the drivers who transported the farm's goods. Everything now fit together. Little by little, the gendarmes pieced the truth back together. 2 months before the murder, Jean Morel had not been alone that night. He was with Camille, in his car, parked on a deserted rest area off the National Road. They spoke in low voices, headlights off. She had just told him she was pregnant, the result of their secret affair. Jean, married, feared the scandal. He tried to convince her to keep quiet, to think things through, as he put it. Camille was crying softly. And then everything changed. 3 silhouettes emerged from the darkness. Windows shattered, screams erupted. Jean was struck, thrown to the ground, his phone snatched away. Camille screamed. The attackers fled, leaving the couple traumatized in the dark. A few minutes later, still covered in dust and blood, Jean climbed back into the car. But instead of driving to the nearest police station, he headed toward Montfaucon. He dropped Camille off in front of her house, begged her to say nothing, then turned back. When he finally arrived at the Saint-Rivière station, he was alone. And that's when everything began to make sense. The gendarme had seen him arrive from the north. While the rest area was to the south, Jean had driven past the station, dropped off Camille, then returned the other way to fabricate his story. That might, he believed he was erasing the traces of a double fault, adultery and fear. But in truth, he had just laid the first stone of the lie that would betray him 2 months later. For 2 months, the stolen phone was used to harass Camille. Jean, panicked and desperate, tried to distance himself. Married, terrified of scandal, he wanted to end everything, but Camille refused to disappear in silence. Then, one night, he called her from a new number. "We need to talk, come." "Just 5 minutes." She agreed. Around 9 o'clock, she slipped out quietly through the service door. The night watchman saw her one last time, walking through the shadows. Jean was waiting in his van. A few kilometers away, on the road to Saint-Rivière, he wrapped his fingers around her throat. A brief gesture. Cold, overpowered, international, killing food. She saved his life. Then he opened the door, let the body fall into the roadside ditch, and drove on as if he was simply returning from a delivery. Weeks later, the newspapers ran the headline: "Tragedy in Saint-Rivière. A pregnancy, a secret, a murder." Jean Morel was arrested. Antoine Delmas sold his farm and disappeared. Madame Delmas never left her chair again, and each evening, in Montfaucon, a candle still burns on a windowsill. No one knows who lights it, but everyone knows for whom it shines. For Camille.